Hey everybody, today I'm going to do something that I've been asked to do for a very long time, but I've kind of avoided it. I don't do many of these like ranking videos where you rank an artist's albums, just because that's so hard for me to do. It's so hard for me to like give it like my number one, number two kind of thing, just because it changes all the time for me. But this is how I feel today about this particular list. So I'm going to be doing Paul McCartney's albums ranked. And I'm including all of his solo albums, all of his albums with Wings, all of his collaborations like the Fireman albums, stuff like that. And I basically have all of his albums on vinyl, except I don't have Driving Rain and I don't have Kisses on the Bottom. And I also don't have a couple of the Fireman albums, but I'm going to include Driving Rain and Kisses on the Bottom in this list as well. So here we go. So I'm going from the very bottom to the very top. Now there's a lot of albums, as I'm sure you know, so stick around because there's going to be a couple of surprises, I think, and I should also state, as always, this is just my opinion. In no way does this change. I'm not trying to say that you're not allowed to love a certain album or hate a certain album. I'm just letting you know how I feel about these albums. And by the way, I like them all. Let me just be honest. It's Paul McCartney. He is hands down, if I have to choose, my favorite just artist as a solo artist. That's not like a band. Obviously I'd choose the Beatles if it was a band. Paul McCartney would be it for me. He is just my all-time favorite. So here we go. At the very bottom of the list, it's an album from a movie that Paul made. This is Paul's album called Give My Regards to Broad Street. And I'm sure this comes as no surprise to a lot of you that's at the bottom of the list. This album it's not bad in any way, but it features a lot of re-recordings of some of his best-known songs, including some Beatles songs, like Yesterday, Here, There, and Everywhere, For No One, Eleanor Rigby, Long and Winding Road. It also has a bunch of his songs with Wings that he has redone here, like Silly Love Songs, Wanderlust, which I guess is actually a solo Paul song, Ballroom Dancing, stuff like that. And, you know, the people on this album are really amazing. It's produced by George Martin, engineered by Jeff Emmerich. You got Ringo on drums. It's just got an all-star cast of people on here. But it just it's never really been one of my favorite Paul albums, and it's definitely my least listened to of all of his albums. That being said, there's a couple of songs on here that I really like a lot. I love the song No More Lonely Nights. It's an awesome ballad. Dave Gilmour on lead guitar, very cool. I also like Not Such a Bad Boy, very cool song, and that's actually my favorite part of the movie Give My Regards to Broad Street, when they're playing Not Such a Bad Boy. Just a really cool scene. So that's Give My Regards to Broad Street at the very bottom of this list. Next up, I would include, I don't have it, I have it on CD, but I don't have it on vinyl. It would be Paul's album, Kisses on the Bottom. Now this is an album of standard songs that Paul has covered, and it's a fine album. I enjoy listening to it every once in a while, but it just doesn't rank up there for me, just because it doesn't have any original songs on it, other than My Valentine, which he wrote for his current wife, Nancy. And that's a pretty nice song, but again, not a song that I really love all that much. Next up, Paul McCartney's album, Press to Play. Now, this is an album that I think it's big time overlooked. It was an album that I think Paul was trying new things, trying to go in like a kind of a new direction, kind of like going with the times is what I'll say. I know there's a lot of people that defend this album and love it. I just don't love it. There are some tracks on here that I really do like a lot. I like Stranglehold. I like Good Times Comin'. Only Love Remains is a little bit syrupy, but it's still a pretty good song. And I like the song Press as well. So not a bad album in any way, but just not one of Paul's strongest efforts, in my opinion. Next up, McCartney 3. Now, this is obviously very low on the list here, and I think it's really because I haven't had a lot of time with this album. Now, of course, it was released, I think, in like 2021. So I've had, I guess, 4 years to really listen to this, but a lot of Paul's albums for me, over time, they get better and better and better. So this one might go up in my list as time moves on. But for now, I have it down here. I think it's a fine album, especially considering the guy's like, I think he was 78, 79 when he recorded this. Still writing really, really cool songs is what I'll say. Sure, they're not like Beatle quality songs, but they're really good songs, really interesting songs. And overall, I just think it's a fine album, but low on my list. Next up is Paul's Rock and Roll Russian album. And I've always loved this album. This was an album that I first got on CD, like way back in the day when I first started getting into the Beatles. And when I first heard it, I was a little disappointed just because I didn't know any of these songs. I didn't really understand the historical context behind them. Now it's a different story. I actually really enjoy listening to this album. It's a fun one to put on. I should mention also that there's a better album that Paul did called Run Devil Run, which I also don't have on vinyl, which I hope someday to get on vinyl. Very, very hard to find. But I love Run Devil Run. That will also be coming up later on. But this is also still a fine album, the Paul McCartney Russian album. And I think my favorite track on here is a song called Don't Get Around Much Anymore. Just love the way Paul sings that one. So, the Russian album. Next up, it's another album that I don't have. Paul's Driving Rain album. This was released in 2001. And it's got some songs that I really like on it. It's got some production I don't really like all that much. But this is another one of his albums that it grew on me over time. When it first came out, I didn't really like it all that much. But then as the years have gone by, I found myself getting certain songs stuck in my head. Like Tiny Bubble is one that gets in my head a lot. I don't know why. I just like that one a lot. I like Rinse the Raindrops. So it has a couple of songs that I really, really like quite a bit. It has some songs that I really, really despise quite a bit as well. Like Freedom, I think that song, it just doesn't do it for me. There are a couple other songs like Your Loving Flame is a little bit of a cheesy thing for me. But Driving Rain ranks pretty low for me. Next up, another of Paul's newer albums. This is Paul McCartney's Egypt Station album. And I really do like this album. And this is one that definitely has grown on me as well. When it first came out, much like Driving Rain, I didn't like it. In fact, I think I disliked this one more than Driving Rain when it came out. But over time, I've really come to appreciate it and even like some of the songs on here. I like some of the risks that Paul takes on this album as well, like where he tries different things he hasn't really tried before, is what I'll say. But of course, he also does some things that he always does, like making like a medley of his songs. But on this, the medley really works. So, Egypt Station, album that I really do like. Next up, album by Paul McCartney called Pipes of Peace. And this is kind of like Tug of War Volume 2. When he first was recording the Tug of War album, he had so many tracks that he was working on that it was going to be a double album, is what I've heard. But in the end, he decided just to release 2 separate albums, Tug of War and then Pipes of Peace. And Pipes of Peace, another of Paul's albums that I love some of the tracks on here. It has my favorite Michael Jackson collaborations that Paul did. It's a song called The Man. I think that song is absolutely fantastic. And I love the title track, Pipes of Peace, on here is great. And then what else is on here that I like? So Bad is fantastic. I like Sweetest Little Show. So it's got a bunch of really, really good songs. I think the production kind of throws me off on this one mostly, which is why it's a little bit low on my list. But still a fine, fine album, Pipes of Peace. Next up, this is The Firemen, Electric Arguments. This is an album that he made with the artist Youth. And it's a collaboration, but really it's just Paul showing up to his studio, making up songs on the spot. And this is the best of the Fireman albums, in my opinion, because Paul is singing on these songs. Just some amazing, amazing vocal performances by Paul. Probably will go down as the last great Paul vocal album, in my opinion. His voice is just absolutely shredding on some of these songs. And the quality of the recordings on this are also top-notch. If you can get your hands on this particular pressing, it's a double album. it's a beautiful, beautiful listen. Really, really highly recommend it. Some of my favorite songs on here. The first song, Nothing Too Much Out of Sight, is great. Sing the Changes, I love. Light from Your Lighthouse, Highway, Don't Stop Running. All these songs on here are interesting and just a pleasure to listen to. So Paul is in fine form on the Fireman album, Electric Arguments. And I'm not going to rank the other Fireman albums just because they're ambient type music, and I don't really consider those like official Paul studio albums in that sense. And I don't have them on vinyl or CD, so I don't really feel qualified to rank them. Next up, the last album that I don't have on vinyl, which I hope to get someday, would be Paul McCartney's Run Devil Run album. Absolutely love this album. When it came out, it blew me away. It was right at the perfect age for me where I was playing guitar a lot of electric guitar, and this album is just full of just wonderful guitar playing by Dave Gilmour. And there's another guitar player on there as well. I forget his name at the moment, but just a great album. So great, in fact, that I recorded one of the songs that Paul does on this album. I did that on my covers album, Places We Used to Go. And it's just a fantastic, fantastic album. And I hope to get it on vinyl someday. Next up, McCartney 2. Love this album. It's always been one of my favorite Paul albums, but it kind of goes in and out of favor for me. There are times where I just really, really want to listen to this whole album, and I just love all the synths and just the kind of quirky nature of all the songs. And then there are times where some of the songs kind of bug me a little bit. And at the moment, it just doesn't rank that high for me for Paul's albums. I still love it. I still think it's an essential album to have in your Paul McCartney collection. And I love the song Coming Up, obviously. I love the song On the Way. Summer's Day song is great. One of These Days is fantastic. It's just a great album. It's Paul. You can't go wrong with McCartney 2. Okay. One of my favorite of Paul's newer albums. This album is called New, in fact. Just an excellent, excellent record. And we are getting into the part of the McCartney albums where really it's getting harder and harder to rank these. But New is just so fantastic. When this came out, I loved it right away. Listened to this over and over and over again. I got it on CD first. Had it in my car just, I don't know for how long, 6 months probably. And I just devoured the album. That being said, I probably listened to it too much because now I'm a little bit tired of it. Haven't listened to it in a while, but I still love it. And there's so many songs on here like Alligator, I love, Save Us. I love On My Way to Work, Looking at Her, I Can Bet, Appreciate. It's just full of excellent, excellent Paul McCartney songs. So New is really, really great. I should mention that my wife likes this album a lot as well, so that gets a big plus from me. Next up, this might be a little bit controversial, but I don't mind. This is Wings' Wildlife. This is Wings' first official album, and I've always, always liked this album. I love it for most of the reasons why people don't love it. I love that it's quirky. I love that it was kind of recorded in a rush. It's got a certain just kind of electric atmosphere to it that I've always really loved. Sure, it doesn't have some of the best songs that Paul has ever written, but there's a certain charm about this album that I've always just been attracted to. And it's got some of my favorite Paul McCartney songs on here, like Some People Never Know, I think is highly overrated, or not overrated, highly underrated. And I think the song Wildlife is also highly underrated. Just an excellent, excellent song. I love the song Tomorrow, I Am Your Singer. It's got a bunch of great songs on here. So Wildlife ranks very well with me. Okay, next up, Paul McCartney's Flowers in the Dirt album. Love this album. There are so many songs on here that are just essential Paul McCartney songs, like My Brave Face, this one. I love the song Motor of Love. I also love Distractions, great album by Paul. The production isn't necessarily my all-time favorite, and I think the production is really what puts me off mostly when it comes to this album. But generally speaking, a fine album, and definitely one of Paul's like comeback albums, I guess is what you'd call it. Although he never really went away, but he always kind of has a new comeback album every decade or so, and this was the comeback album of the late 80s, early 90s. Great album by Paul called Flowers in the Dirt. And I realize I also have another album that I don't have on vinyl that I need to rank, and that is Paul's Off the Ground album. Off the Ground, I liked when it came out in the 90s. I was still pretty young when it came out, but I remember my dad got it for me, and I kind of liked it at the time. After that, I didn't listen to it all that much, and I still don't listen to it all that much. So if I had to rank Off the Ground, I would put it far below, probably right below Egypt Station is where I would put Off the Ground. Yeah, kind of low for me. Next up, Wings at the Speed of Sound. This is an album that I think it's kind of low on my list just because it doesn't have, it has a lot of Paul on here, of course, but it also has a lot of the other members of Wings, more so than any other albums in their catalog. You got a song that Linda sings, a song that Denny sings, a song that Joe English sings, a song that Jimmy McCulloch sings. So it's just an all-around group effort, and I think that's a good thing, but I also think that for me, when it comes to like ranking a Paul McCartney album, it lowers it on the list. That being said, of course, it has some all-time classics. Silly Love Songs, Let 'Em In, Time to Hide is fantastic. She's My Baby, I've always loved that song. So great album, obviously, Wings at the Speed of Sound. Next up, Paul McCartney's Flaming Pie. Now, I love Flaming Pie. There are some people that really love Flaming Pie and consider it some of Paul's best work he's ever done. I don't believe that to be true. I do think it's a great album, and when it came out, I definitely really liked it. And it was of an exciting time period. It was right after the Beatles anthology, and Paul was like out there. I remember watching him on Oprah, watching him on like a bunch of like late night talk shows like Conan O'Brien and stuff like that. And I was just, it was a super exciting time period to be a fan of Paul McCartney. So because of that, I've always loved Flaming Pie, and I love some of the songs on here. And this is a reissue. This came out, I believe, in 2020. But just a fine album with Paul and Jeff Lynne producing, and Ringo's on a couple of tracks, Steve Miller's on a couple of tracks. Just a brilliant album for Paul McCartney. Flaming Pie. Okay, here we're getting a little bit controversial at it. Some people, this is the part of the video where people might start to go, what is going on here? Back to the Egg, Wings' last album. I love this album. It is another of Paul's quirky albums. He's in full like new wave form here. It almost sounds like Paul McCartney taking in all the like music that was around him at the time, like Squeeze and Elvis Costello and XTC, and he's trying to like, you know, he's not trying to sound like them, but he's trying to like be with the times. And in this case, it wasn't a commercial success, but for the hardcore fans like me and like you probably, we all love this album. Now, some people do not like this album. They think the songs are bad. They don't like the production. I think the songs are really good, really solid, really rockin'. His voice is in fine form, and I've just always really enjoyed this album, Back to the Egg, and I think it's just kind of overlooked in his catalog. And yes, I'm looking forward to hopefully a deluxe edition of Back to the Egg and even London Town that they've been rumored for years now. Hopefully they come out very soon, because I love both those albums. So Back to the Egg. Next up, London Town. I love London Town. This is similar to Back to the Egg. It gets overlooked. A lot of people consider it to be kind of lightweight music. And that is true in some sense. It's definitely got a lot more of a laid-back kind of feel, kind of yacht rock. I guess that's the term people are using now. But I love it. It's got some really great melodies, some really cool sounds. The actual recording quality on this is just great. Get yourself a UK pressing if you can find one. So much better than the US pressing. just a really, really fine Wings album, and an album that I have always loved, London Town. Next up, Paul McCartney's Tug of War. This is the first album released after the death of John Lennon, and Paul is reunited with George Martin and Jeff Emmerich on this album. He has a bunch of guests on here, like Ringo and Stevie Wonder. Steve Gadd plays drums on a song on this. I believe Carl Perkins is on here as well. It's just an excellent album from Paul. Definitely a masterpiece, and one that I've always loved. It's sure, I guess maybe for some other people it might rank even a little bit higher, but for me, I feel very comfortable where I have it in this list. It's just an album that I love and I listen to quite often. Paul McCartney's Tug of War. Next up, Venus and Mars by Wings. Love this album. This was actually the very first Wings album that I ever owned. I had it on CD, and I have very fond memories of my childhood best friend and I. His name is Ian. We would listen to this album just endlessly on his stereo in his room, and in the car when we were driving around or whatever with his parents. We just loved this album. It's probably kind of weird for 12, 13-year-olds at the time in the 90s to be listening to Wings' Venus and Mars album. But there was just something about it that we both liked, and I still like it, and it has a lot of really fond memories for me. I just think it's just a very interesting album is what I'll say. Paul's in a very soulful kind of R&B mood on this album, and it's just full of great songs. So Venus and Mars by Wings, excellent. Next up, might be a little bit of a surprise, this is Paul McCartney's Chaos and Creation album. Love this album. This is, in my opinion, Paul's latest masterpiece. Every single song on here is great. It's produced by Nigel Goodrich, I guess. I think it's Godrich. Might be Goodrich. I don't know. You tell me in the comments below. I'm sure you will. Anyway, he is the producer who has produced Radiohead. He produced some of Beck's stuff. He's just an amazing producer. And he really made Paul rise to the occasion for this album. Every single song on here is great. The way the album flows is perfect. The recording quality is absolutely amazing, and Paul, it really is close to a Beatles album. There's experimentation going on with tape loops. There's some beautiful acoustic ballads. There's some kind of upbeat kind of rockers on here. It's got it all, and it's just a really fine album, and again, a masterpiece. Paul McCartney, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. Okay. Here we go. Paul McCartney's first solo album, McCartney. Absolute stone cold classic, a groundbreaking album that at the time was kind of dismissed, I guess, but now, of course, it's been reassessed as an absolute masterpiece and a very daring album at the time because Paul is playing everything on here. Linda sings a couple of harmonies, but this is really a one-man show. And this was at a time when, Abbey Road and the Let It Be album were still out and in the charts. And then to release a statement that is a laid-back home recording like McCartney was pretty bold, especially considering that, it's his first outing after the Beatles. So this is just a brilliant album. And yeah, there are some songs on here that sound a little bit unfinished, but that's the beauty and the charm of this, in my opinion. So McCartney is just absolutely fantastic. Okay, next up, should come as no surprise, Paul McCartney and Wings, Band on the Run. Arguably his most acclaimed album, his first bona fide masterpiece in the eyes of the public and the critics. For me, I love it. I love Band on the Run. I love so much about it. But I do think that Paul has some better albums, and they're coming up, in my personal opinion. But I love Band on the Run. I think it's, from start to finish, a perfect, brilliant album. And I think ever since this album has come out, Paul has always been kind of chasing this album's like formula in like a weird way. The idea of like having like a big opening song, having some songs that kind of have a reprise, and just the way this album kind of flows. I feel like Paul has always kind of tried to kind of hark back to that a few times, which is perfectly fine to do. But Band on the Run definitely ranks high for me, and would probably rank as number 1 for a lot of people. But for me, it's currently number 3. Coming in at number 2, this will be hands down the most controversial of all of the albums I'm going to be showing, but I don't care. Paul McCartney and Wings, Red Rose Speedway. Now, I will add that this version of the album isn't my favorite version of the album. My favorite version is the double album that came out, I believe in like 2018. I could be wrong. Let me find it in here actually. Okay, yeah, so this came out in 2018. This is the double album version that was originally planned to come out, and then Paul was convinced by his record label to just release a single album, so he then ended up putting out this version of Red Rose Speedway, which I also like. But this version is so amazing. It's absolutely just a brilliant album, and I wish it would have come out like this, because I think it would have had a lot of acclaim, and probably would have been Paul's first masterpiece like Band on the Run. I just love the songs on here. I love the songs that Denny Lane does on here. I even love the songs that Linda does on here. It's just a really great album, and it's nothing else has ever sounded like this, in my opinion. Great guitar work, great production. Paul's voice is so good. The melodies on here, I just absolutely love Red Rose Speedway, the double album version. I also love the single album version as well. It's still great, but you can't beat the double album version. So Red Rose Speedway is number 2 for me. And this should come as no surprise if you watch my channel, because this is one of my all-time favorite albums by anyone. This is Paul and Linda McCartney's Ram. This album just influenced me so much, as far as being a guitar player, as far as being a songwriter, a singer, the harmonies on here, the production. Everything about this has influenced me greatly throughout my life. When I first was aware of this album, I was very young, and I remember my dad would talk about it. We would listen to the Beatles all the time. Of course, I loved them, and I was obsessed with the Beatles right away. But he would always mention, he was like, you know, they all made albums after the Beatles, and there's this one album by Paul McCartney that no one really likes, but I've always loved it. He'd always talk about it like that. He's like, I've always loved it, and everyone kind of like dismisses it, but I think it's so good. He'd always mention it to me. And at the time, he had it on record, but his record player didn't work, or I don't know, you know how that goes back in those days. So it was like, we couldn't listen to it, but he'd always talk about it. Then the day came where he got like a new record player or something, and we listened to Ram for the first time, and it just blew my mind. It was so good. It had that Beatles quirkiness and charm, but it was like its own thing, and there was just something special about Ram. And I remember talking to a couple of my other friends who liked the Beatles. They didn't know anything about Ram at the time. This is like in like the 90s. And it just seemed like anyone I'd ever talked to about Ram, they didn't know about it, or they would just dismiss it as like, that's junk. I don't like that album. And I just never understood. I was like, but it's so good. How come I think it's so good, but nobody else does? And this is, of course, like I said, before the internet and all that kind of stuff. Flash forward to like 20 years after that, like around like 2000, we'll just say 9, right? 2009, 2010. It seemed like Ram all of a sudden got really cool and got the acclaim that it finally deserved as Paul McCartney's bona fide masterpiece. And it absolutely is a masterpiece. And now, of course, when you talk about Ram, most people are like, yeah, that's a great album. I love it. It ranks super high in people's rankings of solo Beatles albums, and I just cannot get enough of Ram. I can listen to Ram every single day, and I'd always be entertained. There are certain times throughout the day where I'm just whistling random songs, and most of the time they're songs from Ram. Dear Boy is a song I whistle all the time. Ram On, Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey. Just, I love every single thing about this album, and I love it because it is so Paul McCartney. This guy is a talent we will not see, I don't think, in our lifetime again. He's that amazing, and this album to me represents his talent in just so many ways. So I can't say enough about Ram. I love Ram. I love just everything about it. I love the artwork. Very cool. So that's my ranking of Paul McCartney's albums. If I missed any of the albums, please let me know in the comments below. I think I covered them all. And I'd love to know what your ranking of the albums would be. It's a very hard task, so you know, if you try to make a ranking video for Paul McCartney's albums, please link it in the comments below. I'd love to watch it. But I don't envy you because it's a hard thing to do. Anyway, that's it for now. By the way, I did make a video about I am selling some records again. I'm using the process I used before, where I try to find the best pressing of certain albums. Currently, I have the Beatles' Revolver. It's a German pressing. I have it up on my eBay page, which you can click down below. And if you want to pick it up, it's there. So that's it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Take care, and bye for now.